everybody. Welcome to the Rock Show. How you doing, Rob?
I'm pretty good. How you been? You've been on an
I'm
adventure.
okay. Yeah, we're doing this show. I'm actually in Dublin, okay? And we're going to be talking about a band called the Waterboys today. Very popular over here. Have you ever heard of them, Rob?
No, I actually haven't heard of it until I started doing this right now.
Yeah. Very cool band. Very popular over here. They've been popular since the kind of mid '80s, pretty much. In America, they didn't have a lot of crossover, but a very cool band. In the mid to late '80s, they were played a little bit on MTV and places like that, but not too popular as far as that. But they're very popular over here. In fact, I came over here about 7 or 8 days ago, and I've been hearing them all the time. Very cool because they actually are on tour right now. To be honest with you.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I think they're gonna
Yeah.
play What's the Hole, right? Are they in the city?
Yeah, they're coming to Webster Hall in September.
I saw something today while I was looking them up that they were coming at Webster Hole. Yeah, because this
Yeah,
group is technically this group is really not that old. When you look at they were formed in 1983, so it's
right.
like it's weird to say. It's almost like a new group, like a '90 group
Well,
almost.
they've had different members. They've gone through different lineups over the years. The main guy is a Scottish musician named Mike Scott.
Yeah.
Okay, and he's had everybody from British musicians to Irish musicians with him, and over the last 4 decades, people that you know were considered punk rock or folk rock or rock and roll, Celtic soul, all kinds of genres have been involved with the band. There was also a period where they weren't active in the early '90s, but they kind of like reformed at a few points.
Yeah, they
And
had hiatus for a little bit.
yeah. I mean, Mike Scott's the original guy. He's the singer, main songwriter, and I think he's fantastic, very talented. Where I'm sitting right now, I mean, I wish I can open this window up behind me, but unfortunately, it'll make too much light and it'll screw up the screen. But right behind me is the Guinness factory in Dublin.
The Guinness Factory.
I mean, it's been a fantastic trip here, man. I've been pretty much blown away by the whole trip.
I saw you went to the International over there. How nice is that?
Oh wow. Okay, so the International Bar, everybody knows I'm a regular at in NYC, but there is an international bar in Dublin too. Okay, and I went there, and when I told them I was a regular at the NYC location, there's
Yeah.
no affiliation between the two. They treated me like royalty, and I went back. I was there on Sunday. I went back there today for a few drinks. This is my last day here, last full day here. So I wanted to go back to a few spots that I had been to, and the international in Dublin is fantastic. Incredible people. It's kind of a comedy club, Rob.
Oh, a comedy club?
Yeah,
I want to show off the new International merch.
there you go. The international in Dublin has there's the main floor, and
Yeah.
I swear the kind of people in there would be anybody that you would meet with you, over at
Oh
over
man.
at the New York City location. The bottom floor is a lounge, very cool. Okay, the second floor is it's a comedy club,
That's pretty funny.
and yeah, they have a whole bunch of stuff going on almost every night. And I didn't see any of the comedy stuff there, but I hear it's very popular.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah, it is. Now, getting back to the Water Boys, their sound was basically called the big music. Okay, very
What,
popular in
what's
in
that?
this
What do you
part of the
mean
world.
big music?
Well, there was a song on their second album which was called "A Pagan Place," and
Yeah,
it became the big music was something that was just kind of like affiliated with their whole sound, and a few other bands. They kind of got lumped in for a while with bands like U2, Simple
mm,
Mind, Big Country. Remember Big Country?
yeah,
Okay, stuff like that. But in the late '80s, they got more affiliated with what was called like a folk influenced kind of sound, and they would kind of cross over between that and rock and roll and other shit over the years. I mean, they're a very cool kind of like band that kind of like changed their sounds over the years, but even by doing that, they kind of stay consistent. If that makes any sense, I don't
yeah,
know. So they went through like four distinct phases. Their early years, what was called a big music period, was followed by a folk music period, which characterized by an emphasis on touring over album production. In other words, they were more about a touring band than they were about a studio band. And it kind of became like they had an album called Dream Harder, and then the band broke up in like the late '90s, and they would reform again, and they became like rock and folk and other stuff in that whole time. It's a very interesting thing. I'm going to tell the whole story about it. So the main guy in the band is a guy named Mike Scott. Okay, and he's from Edinburgh, Scotland, and he was the son of a college lecturer. And he's the founder and really kind of only permanent member of the Waterboys. Now, having begun his career in a punk band called White Heat, obviously named after the Velvet Underground song. Okay, they were followed by another band in Edinburgh called Another Pretty Face. He moved to London and he formed another band called The Red and the Black. Now, there was a member in that band called Anthony Thistlethwaite, and him and Scott had basically kind of got into a guy named Nicky Sudden. Nicky Sudden's a very cool, interesting person. We should probably do a podcast on him.
oh yeah,
Okay. Yeah. But there were several concerts that Nicky Sudden had done in London, and Thistlethwaite introduced Scott to drummer Kevin Wilkinson. And this was kind of the formation of the
okay,
Waterboys. They kind of all met each other. Now, during 1982, Scott made a number of recordings with Thistlethwaite and a guy Wilkinson, all right, who Kevin Wilkinson, who was in a band called the Stadium Dogs. And during that 1982 period, they made a bunch of demos and recordings. And these sessions were recorded at Red Shop Studio in Islington in Scotland, and it would be released under the Waterboys name later on, but it was kind of like uh, an early version of the band. You understand what I'm saying? It
yeah.
wasn't like what
The
would
band, yeah,
become
but it's an early version. It's like a first run.
right, kind of like a first run. Okay, um, very similar to what the lineup they had in their first and second albums, but with a few minor differences. Now, in 1983. Scott had signed to Ensign Records as a solo act, and he decided to start a whole new band. So he chose the Waterboys as its name, and that's from a line in the Lou Reed song "The Kids" from the album Berlin. We've
But
talked about that album in
yeah,
the past. Now, in March 1983, Ensign released the first recording under the new band name, the Waterboys, with a single called A Girl Named Johnny. It was the A side of which was attributed to Patti Smith.
Mhm.
Now, this was followed in May by the Waterboys' performance as a group on the BBC's Old Grey Whistle Test. All right, that was a show that was on, I think, once a week or so. Okay, and the BBC performance included a new member, which was keyboard player Carl Wallinger. Now, Carl was a guy who played multi instruments, bunch of instruments. Okay, and he was actually a Beatles fanatic who had been involved with an early version of the Alarm. Remember the Alarm?
Yeah,
68 guns and all that stuff.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
an early version of the Alarm was called Quasimodo, and Wallinger would go on to lead the band World Party later on,
Yeah.
uh, kind of like a side project of the Waterboys. Now they released their self debut title, the Waterboys, named after the in July of 1983. Their music was influenced by Patti Smith, Bob Dylan, David Bowie, and many people, a lot of critics compared them kind of to like Van Morrison and even U2, like
Wow.
early U2.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, I kind of think that's a little, in my opinion, it's a little inaccurate because maybe I get the U2 connection in a sense. Dylan, Bowie, not so much, but then again, the Dylan connection was really about the songwriting. There was
Yeah.
some incredible songwriting going on with Mike Scott in this band. So they called it kind of like new wave or post punk. It was one of these groups that really couldn't be pinned down with a label. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So after the huh?
I think they were also they were very they were like a rock and roll, but they did a lot of folk music also, So they got that
Yeah,
weird.
I mean it was a big yeah, I mean it was a big folk music influence, and
Yeah,
what it's hard for a lot of Americans to kind of get that for what's goes on over here.
yeah,
Folk music, whether it's like traditional Irish music or Scottish music, things like that. There's this like folk, very like primitive kind of music that's influenced everybody.
yeah,
So whether you're even a band like U2 or the Alarm or even like bands like Waterboys, you have this background where folk music is an important part of what you were listening to.
yeah,
In America, it's a little different. Bands like maybe like the Byrds in the 1960s were considered folk, and they kind of like influenced people that would turn into like Crosby, Stills and Nash and stuff
yeah,
like that. It's a little different in America, but in England, Scotland, and Ireland, and places like that, folk music is huge, even to the 1980s and 90s. So
wow,
yeah, now they were really known as a touring band, the Water Boys. They did have that first self debut album with the name the Water Boys, but their first show was at a place called the Back Shop Club in Frankfurt, which is in Germany, in February 1984. Now the band at that point consisted of Mike Scott on vocals and guitar, Anthony Thistlethwaite on saxophone and mandolin, Wallinger on keyboards, okay, and then Roddy Lorimer on trumpets, Martin Swain on bass, Kevin Wilkinson on drums, John Caldwell, who was also in a band called From Another Pretty Face, on
yeah,
guitar,
yeah.
and Scottish singer Eddie Reeder was backing vocals. And that was like the first two concerts they did.
But that seemed like a lot of people on stage, right? It's like
Yeah. Well, you're talking like 8, 9, 10 people on stage. Like
yeah.
amazing stuff. Now, in late 1983, early 1984, the band made some new recordings, and they kind of overdubbed some older material, and it was called A Pagan Place, their second album, in June of 1984. The official Waterboys lineup at this time, according to the record sleeve of A Pagan Place, was Scott, Thistlethwaite, Wallinger, Wilkinson, with guest contributions from Reeder, Lorimer, and many others. The release of the album was followed by further touring in the UK, Europe, and the US, including support by the Pretenders and U2, and a show at the Glastonbury Festival. So they were actually supporting some major acts at that point. They were getting the attention of people. Maybe not so much in the U.S. at that point, but it was kind of forming. You know what I mean? So the album "A Pagan Place" was preceded by the single called "The Big Music." Now, the name of the single's A-side track was adopted by some commentators as a description of the Waterboys' sound, and is still used to kind of refer to that musical style of their first three albums, which were built up by Scott from hard-panned multiple 12-string rhythm guitarists. Okay, so we're talking like folk sound here. Anybody using 12 strings, you're influenced by Roger McGuinn and a lot of these people in folk music. There was piano, there was saxophone, there was an occasional violin or a trumpet. Wallinger's instrumentation arrangements were included. You had some bass, you had some orchestral synthesizer stuff going on. It was like a very big sound at the time, and that's why it was called the big music. All right. So Wilkinson left the Waterboys at that point to concentrate on another project, and the band began to record new material for a 1985 new album. Now, late in these sessions, future Waterboys Steve Wickham added his violin to the track called "The Pan Within," and he had been invited by Mike Scott after he had heard a Sinead O'Connor demo recorded at Carl Wallinger's house. All right, so Sinead O'Connor was kind of like, not involved with the Waterboys, but Wallinger was kind of involved with her, and there was a official trio at that point of Scott, Thistlethwaite, and Wallinger, and they released their third album called "This Is the Sea" in October of 1985. This is when I kind of first picked up on the band in 1985. I was a teenager at that point, and always paying attention to what was going on the other side of the pond. And "This Is the Sea" was something that kind of crossed over a little bit. There was a single of it called "The Whole of the Moon," and it was a popular song that was played on MTV. There was a video for it, and it was a hit single in the UK charts. Now, Mike Scott himself, who wrote the song, kind of he basically didn't want to perform it on Top of the Pops. Now, in Top of the Pops in the UK, when you have a song hit the top 40, it automatically allows you to be in Top of the Pops. So he kind of like had a problem with it because he would have had to lip sync the song. And in those days, he didn't want to do that. So, it kind of like, because he wouldn't go on, it didn't become the bigger hit it could have been. But "The Whole of the Moon" by the Waterboys is still like kind of a cult classic. There was a video for it on MTV, and that was the song that crossing over to the United States, everybody kind of knew.
Yeah.
So there was some successful tours going on with the Waterboys in the UK and in North America. Now Wickham at that point had become a full-time member. There was a guy named Marco Sin that replaced Martin Swain on bass, and Chris Whitten had replaced Kevin Wilkins on drums for the tour. Wallinger, who was kind of a budding songwriter and producer in his own way, co produced and arranged much of the initial album sessions on this album, including the song The Hole of the Moon. If you watch the video for The Hole of the Moon, he's the guy on piano with the John Lennon glasses, very cool looking. You see him kind of off to the side. Now, there was kind of like a problem between him and Mike Scott, who was the singer, guitar player, main songwriter of the band, about who would be the songwriting dominator. Now, during the American tour, he announced that he was leaving the band and subsequently left to form World Party. World Party was the name of a Waterboys song, and he started it himself. They had a song called Ship of Fools, which did very well as a crossover between Scotland and the United States. Now, there was also there was a band called the Ruts, a punk band, and they had a drummer called Dave Ruffy, and he would replace Chris Whitten, and then there would be another kind of change in the band as Sin had left the Waterboys because he had a bad heroin addiction. Okay, Thistlethwaite covering for him on bass, did a few shows as well. Now, between 1986 and 1988, there was something called the Raggle Taggle Band, and then the Waterboys did Fisherman Blues. Fisherman Blues is very important. We'll talk about that. They kind of got discouraged by the stadium rock career path that he was now being expected to follow. All right, Mike Scott, in their popularity, they were starting to be offered on like stadium tours and stuff like that. And he didn't want to really do that.
Yeah.
He had gotten involved in kind of what would be called American roots music, basically country, gospel music, Cajun music, and blues.
A little bit of
And
everything.
this was a little bit of everything. And even though they were getting a little notoriety on MTV and other places, he wasn't interested in that. He wanted to kind of keep it down a little bit. So basically, Scott moved to Dublin in Ireland at that point. And it was here where he could kind of pursue this type of music that he was interested in. And the band's lineup would change once again with Mike Scott, Wickham, and Thistlethwaite now focusing at least as much on mandolin as on saxophone. They were joined by a guy named Trevor Hutchinson on bass and quite a bunch of different drummers, starting with a guy named Peter McKinney, and then they would follow by several others. The new band, which was still called the Waterboys, but often called the Raggle Taggle Band. All right. They even though they were the Waterboys, they sometimes referred themselves as that. They recorded in 1986, mostly around Dublin and Ireland. They played the UK, they played Ireland, of course, they played parts of Europe, and even Israel. They were playing with a lineup of Scott, Wickham, Thistlethwaite, Hutchinson, and a returning member called Dave Ruffy. In late November 1986, Scott, Thistlethwaite, Wickham, without Hutchinson, spent a week in California recording some kind of like roots inspired music with a producer named Bob Johnson and various American session players. Now, McKinney was back on drums, for the live dates in early 1987, but he got replaced by a guy named Fran Bean in the summer of 1987. So the lineup now included Julian Piper. Okay, now Julian Piper is a type of bagpipe. Okay, and when you're in Ireland, sometimes a lot of traditional bands they have a Julian Piper in the band.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bagpipe. The guy's name was Vinnie Kildorf, and he played a date with them in what was called Dublin Harbor. Another former Waterboy who was on trumpet named Roddy Lorma briefly rejoined the band for a performance at the Pictish Festival in Letham, Scotland. Some of the performances from this era were released in 1998 as the live adventures of the Waterboys, including a famous Glastonbury performance in 1986. In late 87, Mike Scott temporarily relocated to Spidal in Galway, which is the western part of Ireland. And he really kind of like immersed himself at that point in Irish music and Irish culture.
Yeah.
In early 88, he brought the whole band there where they set up a recording studio in Spittle House to finish recording their new album. Patti Smith Group, okay, always had kind of an outside influence on
Yeah.
this. Their drummer was called J.D. Dougherty, and he briefly joined them for a while at those Spittle sessions, which featured Mike Scott, Wickham, Thistlethwaite, and Hutchinson, augmented by visiting West Coast Irish folk musicians. So he was bringing people from all over the place to the western part of Ireland to
To
kind of do
play.
demos and things like that, right? To jam.
Yeah.
Now, what would come out of that would be the album Fisherman Blues, which is a fantastic record. It was released in October 1988, and it was really kind of like a pulling together of a lot of different sessions that they had, demos, some stuff recorded in Dublin over the past 3 years. And it showcased a variety of guest musicians and really temporary members. Um, Everybody was playing stuff from country to gospel to blues and a lot of like Irish and traditional music. It's an interesting record. They had a big following at that point, and some people kind of split as to what their support would be with this record. Not everybody liked it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Their critics and fans of the band were kind of split as to how they felt about it. There was extreme folk influences on the record. Some people were disappointed by that. Some people embraced it, but I liked it. It was there's a track called "This Is the Sea," okay, and stuff like that. And Mike Scott kind of at that point was really a major proponent of Irish music at a time when there really weren't people promoting that stuff. You had guys like Shane MacGowan and the Pogues at that time, but they were doing something a little bit different. And Mike Scott was really the only other guy kind of doing it. Now he said he fell in love with Ireland and he wanted to kind of uh, bring that music to the forefront of what he was doing, even though he was Scottish. Now, um, he owed a large number of the tracks recorded in those 3 year period between "This Is the Sea" and "Fisherman's Blues." It was, a 3 year period between albums. There was another album that came out later on that kind of tracked that period of time. It was called "Too Close to Heaven." In America, it was "Fisherman Blues Part 2." All right.
It's funny.
And yeah, and it was a lot of like bonus material. It took years for that stuff to come out. He was constantly recording things, putting it in the can, not releasing it. Stuff came out later on. Now, between 1989 and 1990, um, there was a period called the Magnificent Seven to the Room to Room to Rome. All right, Rome, ROAM. Now they supported Fisherman Blues with a lineup of Scott, Wickham, Thistlethwaite, Hutchinson, Dougherty from Patti Smith Band, Kilduff, Lorma, and two other musicians. All right, and these guys played whistle, flute, piano. Uh, it was a total like Irish folk type thing. Now by the summer of 1989, the lineup had changed again with guys like Kilduff, McElwine, Lorimer leaving the band, and Doherty being replaced by a Dublin drummer named Noel Bridgman. He was actually on Fisherman Blues, but he didn't tour in the beginning of that. Scott recruited a teenage accordion player named Sharon Shannon, who was already kind of like an Irish folk star and kind of was a person who could marry Irish traditional music to rock and roll. All right. And this was called a period of time called the Magnificent Seven. They had a whole bunch of people in the
Yeah,
band.
definitely got a bunch of people. It looked like they always had a bunch of people.
They did. They did. If you ever saw them on stage, it was quite a few people. Okay. So after a bunch of touring, the band returned to Spidal to record a new album produced by Barry Beckett. Now, Scott's initial concept was a dream of merging traditional Irish music and pop in a kind of like Sergeant Pepper Beatles kind of way. But as recording progressed, he realized that the production process exposed flaws within the band and compromised the music, which kind of unraveled the existing lineup and their Celtic focus. All right. The resulting album was called Room to Rome, and it was released in September of 1990 and again was received to mixed reviews. And Scott kind of got a little kind of like, uh, I would say it kind of dampened his enthusiasm as to what was going on. So the Magnificent Seven lineup disintegrated before the release of Room to Rome, and sadly, it was an interesting lineup, but it wouldn't last. Scott and Thistlethwaite had opted to fire Noel Bridgman and replace him with a different drummer. Okay, they needed somebody that was considered a little tougher.
Yeah.
Wickham already disagreed, and chose to leave the band. And there was a Louisianan drummer, Ken Blevins, a more kind of like rock orientated musician that was recruited to replace the drummer they had. And Shannon and Blakey was asked to leave the band. So with Blevins on drums, Scott, Thistlethwaite, and Hutchinson, they would continue on with the tour dates that they had. Unfortunately, they were unable to play the folk and roots material of the past 5 years. So the Waterboys doggedly re-embraced a rock sound at that point and reverted to sets that were from their first three albums, brand new songs written by a bunch of people that could do like the Room to Rome album and some Bob Dylan covers. So the band was kind of fucked up at that point. You know what I'm saying?
Very fucked up.
Now, 1991 to 93 would be a period of time that would see the end of the band. It would reform again, but we would talk about this. During 1991, the Waterboys continued to go through major changes. Discouraged by the collapse of Scott's Celtic Irish music idea and the disintegration of his whole band, basically. The Raggle Taggle, the Magnificent. He determined to play, but play kind of rock music again. Mike Scott would leave Dublin and move to New York.
Wow.
Yeah. And Trevor Hutchinson left the band altogether to become a traditional folk musician. The band was in pieces, it's true. And they re released an issue of their 1985 single, The Hole of the Moon, which kind of got popular again a few years
Yeah,
later.
yeah, of course.
Okay.
That's what happened.
Yeah, and there was kind of a dance and rave scene that picked up on this. Rave music was becoming a big thing in the early '90s. It reached number 3 again in the UK singles chart, and they decided to put out a compilation best of called the Waterboys, Best of the Waterboys '81 through '90, which got to number 2 in the UK album charts.
That's pretty
And
good.
yeah. I mean, it's funny, despite all their lineup changes and focus on what they were doing with their music, they were popular. And they're still popular. I mean, I'm over here in Ireland right now, and I'm hearing Waterboys music on a daily basis.
Wow.
Yeah, I have to be honest. I didn't know how really big they were until I came over here just now, and it's still years later, and they're still big.
And it's still big.
Yeah.
That's
Now,
when you really know you're good.
what's that?
That's when you know you're good. And they're playing Webster Hall, which is not a bad venue.
Yeah, they're playing Webster Hall in New York City in September. So are the Pogues. The Pogues are playing.
Shit.
Yeah. Did I tell you I'm going to the after party?
Oh yeah, you did, but it's at that bar, right?
What? Right, Patty Riley's with Dark Streets and all that. I can't wait for that. That's a whole other story. I'll tell that another day on a podcast. But so they released this greatest hits, the best of the Waterboys, '81 to '90, and that fulfilled their contract with Chrysalis Records that they had, and it put them in a good position to sign another deal, which they would sign with Geffen Records. All right, in America of all places, and Scott's living in New York. He's kind of bouncing between New York and Chicago, which is another Irish stronghold in the States. Yeah. And he wrote a bunch of new songs and kind of like auditioned some new members of the band that could be potential Waterboys with different guitar players and all that. Now, regretfully, there was no place in the new songs and style for Anthony Thistlethwaite. He would leave. And the longest surviving bandmate, he was really the longest surviving one since 1991. Now, the only remaining Waterboy, Scott recruited drummer Carla Azar and bass player Charlie Drayton. The latter soon replaced by former Frank Zappa band member Scott Thunes. And they would record a Waterboys album called Dream Harder, along with guitarist Chris Bruce and a bunch of session musicians. Dream Harder was released in May of 1993 and saw the band embracing more of like a hard rock influenced sound. Now, the album produced 2 UK top 30 singles called The Return of Pan and the Glastonbury song. Those were top 30 hits. Mike's got to become frustrated, feeling discouraged by the disappointing end of his Celtic phase, and feeling that Dream Harder was only about half strength as what he could do. Now he was frustrated, but by not being able to get a new touring Waterboys band together, he decided to make further changes. He abandoned the Waterboys name altogether, left New York, and moved to the northeast of Scotland for the first of several stays at the Findhorn Foundation. And he got into a bunch of different things at that point, kind of like esoteric, spiritual stuff like that. He kind of left music for a little point at that point. Now, between 1994 and 2000, Mike Scott was solo, and then there would be a Waterboys return. In 94, having divided the intervening time between Dublin and the Findhorn Foundation, Mike Scott would return to London and embark on a solo career, which produced 2 albums. The almost wholly acoustic album called Bring 'Em All in 1995, and the rock and soul inspired Still Burning in 1995 again. Although Scott himself was happy with both records, they didn't really do well commercially, resulting in the end of that Geffen contract. In 1990,
he probably did that to end the contract, the 2 solo albums.
possibly. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, he's a guy that likes to do his own thing, you know. In 98, Scott performed a solo show at the Galway Arts Festival, at which he reunited on stage with Steve Wickham and Anthony Thistlethwaite on the encore. And in October of 1999, Scott and Wickham reunited for a whole full gig in Sligo. That's in Ireland. Okay. Now, also during 1999, Scott began reestablishing his musical direction, bringing himself up to speed with rock and roll, and basing his new sound on kind of a psychedelic elemental roar, he called it, aided by assorted effects, pedals, and electro-harmonics, microsynth, a blues harmonica microphone, harmoniums, a Hindu beatbox, and even a theremin. You know what a theremin is, Rob?
What?
A theremin is an instrument that it's played almost like by magnets. You hear it in a lot of like old horror movies. Like, it's a very strange instrument. Okay, and he was bringing that kind of sound into what he was doing.
What the hell is the Hindu boombox?
Yeah, I don't know. I have no idea what the fuck that
funny,
is.
Man.
Yeah, I mean, this guy was into like a lot of different kind of stuff. Wow. Hold on one second. I think I'm getting a knock on my door. Hold on a second.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Okay, cool. I just got my laundry delivered. Nice. Okay. So, he was bringing in some very like interesting kind of sounds and stuff like that, and it would result in an album called "A Rock in the Weary Land." And at that point, he would resurrect the Waterboys name. And the album had a new kind of experimental rock sound, inspired by contemporary bands like Radiohead and Beck. And he would call it sonic rock. Now, there was some other people associated with the band, with a lot of like guest appearances by Thistlethwaite, Kevin Wilkerson, and Dave Ruffy. This would be one of Wilkinson's final appearances on record due to his death by suicide on July 17, 1999 at age 41. Now, by the summer of 2000, Scott had assembled a new Waterboys lineup, himself on vocals and guitar, Richard Naif on keyboards and organs, bass player Livingston Brown and drummer Jeremy Stacey Wickham guested on, and Jeremy Stacey, and then Wickham guested on the fiddle at live dates in Dublin and in the north of Ireland in Belfast, which resulted in a tour in the late 2000s. And he would rejoin the band permanently in January of 2001. So Mike Scott, Wickham, and Naif were the core of the Waterboys at that point by 2003. They changed directions once again and released an album called Universal Hall. And it was mostly an acoustic album with the return of some of the Celtic influences that Fisherman Blues had.
Yeah.
Fisherman Blues is my favorite record from them. I don't think they ever topped that, but they would kind of come back to that over the years. I have to mention too. I was at the Irish festival last month in the Rockaways in Queens, and it was a rainy day. Okay, but the bands were still playing. It didn't stop them. There was a stage. They were covered, and there's a band. I don't know if you remember a band called the Bogmen. You ever hear of them, Rob?
I read the bar, man. Yeah.
The Bogmen. Okay, the singer from the Bogmen went on stage with uh, Mark Bosch, the guitar player who was part of the house band for that day. Mark Bosch played with a lot of guys like Ian Hunter and from Mata Hoople and stuff like that. And they came on and they did tracks from Fisherman Blues, and I was just blown away watching it.
Wow.
It had been, to be honest with you, it had been years since I heard some of that stuff, and it got me kind of totally into it again. So anyway, Universal Hall kind of brought back some of that stuff from
The
Fisherman
Celtic
Blues,
style.
right? And they would then release a live album called Karma to Burn in 2005 with a guy named Carlos Hercules on drums, Steve Walters on bass, and a guest appearance by Sharon Shannon on accordion. She was back
Oh,
and
yeah.
basically showed off some of the kind of like acoustic sides of the band that used to be there. They would work on a studio album called Book of Lightning, which revived some of the psychedelic rock aspects of early stuff. And that was released on the 2nd of April in 2007 with yet another total lineup of Scott, Naif, and Wickham. They were joined in the studio by Leo Abrams on lead guitar, bass player Mark Smith, and drummer Brian Blade, while further contributions were made by former Waterboys members from various recordings and touring bands. The lineup came to an end with the course by that time, by 2009. Richard Naif left in February to spend more time with his family. Smith sadly died suddenly and unexpectedly in November of 2009 at the age of 49, leaving Mike Scott and Wickham as basically the two main members of the band.
Yeah.
In
So this
20,
thing was a revolving door. He changed
it,
lineup
it, it,
so
it,
much.
it really was. I mean, even today, Mike Scott is really the only guy. All right, but at that point, it was Scott and Wickham was the core of the band. So in 2010, um, Mike Scott did something that he was thinking of doing for 20 years, and he set 20 W.B. Yeats poems, the famous W.B. Yeats, Irish literary giant, a poet. He set poems of Yeats to music in an enterprise that evolved into a show entitled An Appointment with Mr. Yeats. The Waterboys held the show's world premiere from the 15th to the 20th of March in 2010 in Yeats's own theater called the Abbey Theater in Dublin, which I've been walking past that on a daily basis on my trip here. Okay, the
Wow.
Abbey Theater, and um, it was a 5 night show that quickly sold out and went to rave reviews in the Irish Times and other publications. The Irish actor playwright Michael Harding was involved. Some of the poems performed included the hosting of Seed, the Lake Isle of Innisfree, News for the Delphic Oral, and the Song of the Wandering Angus, along with an amalgamation of two Yeats lyrics that became the song Let the Earth Bear Witness, which Mike Scott had produced during the Sea of Green, which was 2009 Iranian election protests. Now, do you remember the in 2009 they called it what was it called? The Arab. Oh God, what was it called? Do you remember when Obama was president? They called the Arab something. The Arab. Ah, I can't
What the
remember.
Arab be?
It was a point when a lot of people in Iran and other countries. Iran is a Persian country, so they're not Arab. But the Arab uprising. I know I'm saying it wrong, but it was like an uprising at that period, and he kind of was in the middle of that. Mike Scott. Now
Wow.
the musical arrangements for these poems were varied and very experimental. On the band's website, Scott described the arrangements as psychedelic, intense, kaleidoscopic, and a mix of rock, folk, and fairy music, the delivery of which signaled yet another musical shift in the band. Okay. So, an appointment with Mr. Yates returned to Dublin on the 7th of November in 2010 in the city's Grand Canal Theatre. The show was performed at the Barbican Hall in London in February 2011. The album version of An Appointment with Mr. Yates, released on the 19th of September of 2011, and it reached the UK top 30. The band lineup for this album centered on Mike Scott, Wickham, and new Waterboys members James Hellowell on keyboards, Mark Arserio on bass, and Ralph Salmons on drums, joined by guests including an oboe player named Kate St. John and an Irish folk singer named Katie Kim. Now, in 2011, the Waterboys released further archive recordings, older recordings, in the shape of what was called In a Special Place, the piano demos for This Is the Sea. In 2013, they released the entire set of recordings from the 3-year Fisherman Blues sessions as a 6 CD box set called Fisherman's Box. If anybody has ever heard this, I
Wow.
only heard it recently. The whole box set. Incredible. I mean, it was a 3-year period where they weren't releasing anything between the Whole of the Moon and Fisherman Blues, and it's all just encapsulated right there in that set. It's incredible.
Wow.
Um, 2014 to the present time would be called Modern Blues, Soul, Funk, and Beats period. Ralph Salmons remained with Mike Scott and Wickham for the band's next album called Modern Blues, which was first announced in October of 2014 and it came out in January of 2015 in the UK. It would come out in April, a couple months later in North America. Inspired mostly by soul and blues stuff, the album was recorded in Nashville and produced by Mike Scott and mixed by Bob Clearmountain. The lineup introduced another new Waterboys keyboard player, brother Paul Brown, replacing Hollowell at that point, and the bass was provided by veteran Muscle Shoals bass player David Hood. Muscle Shoals is a studio down, I believe, in Alabama. All
Yeah.
right, the Muscle Souls studios legendary for stuff by like the Stones and Leonard Skinner and stuff like that. Um, it was kind of a country rhythm and blues influenced album, and the first UK single from the Modern Blues album was called November Tale. Modern Blues was followed in 2017 by a double album called Out of All This Blue, which built on the soul and blues of its predecessor album while adding more funk and contemporary dance rhythms and was released on the 8th of September by BMG Records. Mike Scott described it as 2/3 love and romance, 1/3 stories and observations. Interesting. He's an interesting guy. The songs just kept coming, and he called it, they kept coming and in pop colors. The first single from the album was called If the Answer Is Yeah, and it was released in July of that year. Angus Ralston had joined as a permanent Waterboys bass player in 2016 and participated in the recording for the next studio album called Where the Action Is, which was announced March of 2019 and released on the 24th of May by the Cooking Vinyl label. It continued the Waterboys' love affair with soul music, blues, and funk, while also experimenting with what could be called hip hop. The
Hip
first UK single, yeah, the first UK single from the album was called Right Side of Heartbreak, Wrong Side of Love. And it was released on the 14th of March. Now, on May of 21st of 2019, the band shared the music video for the third single off the record, Ladbroke Grove Symphony, which was a tribute to the former bohemian heart of West London, in which Mike Scott invoked his time living and writing among the crumbling seaside-esque streets of Notting Hill during the 1980s. Wow, right? The
Yeah.
accompanying montage video captured the magic of the Grove in all its weird and wonderful counterculture and featured new film and vintage photography by Scott as he told the story of the song. The band's 14th studio album called Good Luck Seeker was released on the 21st of August 2020, my birthday, 21st of August, continuing the band's contemporary American roots explorations while also engaging with some of their Irish folk interests of the past. And there was also some spoken word on that album. The first song to be previewed from the album was My Wanderings in the Weary Land on the 5th of June. The single called The Soul Single was released on the 15th of July. The band's former drummer, Noel Bridgman, died on March 23rd, 2021 at the age of 74. On the 3rd of September 2021, the Waterboys released another box set called The Magnificent Seven, containing archive live studio and session recordings of the 1989 through 1990 Room to Roam band, featuring Scott Wickham, Bridgman, Anthony Thistlethwaite, Trevor Hutchinson, Sharon Shannon, and Colin Blakely. Wickham was absent from the band's 15th studio album, All Souls Hill, which was initiated during the COVID lockdown of 2020 and featured extensive collaborations between Mike Scott in his home studio and a new collaborator, producer, frequent member Paul Weller, collaborators Simon Dine. Paul Weller is from the Jam. Okay, remember that. Okay, now while still utilizing this hip hop, electric roots music approach of the previous three Waterboys albums, it also went deeper into Irish folk and poetry aspects of the band's late 80s, early 90s phase. And it was released again on the label Cooking Vinyl in May of 2022. The Waterboys announced Steve Wickham's second formal departure from the band on the 14th of February 2022. He left again, having realized that he was now more connected with the band's legacy music rather than the creation of its new material. Wickham opted to step down from regular involvement to focus on his own music and other projects. Both Wickham and other band members stated that he would remain part of the Waterboys family and return for other Waterboys projects in the future. Another long-standing Waterboys family member, Anthony Thistlethwaite, briefly rejoined the band for festival dates in July and August of 2022. In December of 2024, Mike Scott announced on social media that a new Waterboys LP would be released in 2025. So we're hoping for that. Okay.
Probably is really.
I don't think it's come out yet. I think it's on its way. This band is very interesting. Obviously, from everything I said. Yeah, I mean, they're a combination.
They've been all over the place.
They are all over the place, but in a very interesting way that kind of combines literary things, poetry, stuff like Yeats and things like that, and Irish folk and Scottish folk, and even getting into a hip hop type thing. I kind of think I don't play that up too much. I
Yeah.
wouldn't call it hip hop really, but they do have kind of a sound that is unique to themselves in whatever form they do.
It's not bad, man. Not a lot of history, but man, how many band? That guy had more band members than I'd seen hookers.
You're right. You're right.
Well, and he also went back and forth, but it's also messed up with people. So, and he also wanted to be right. So he if he got a little criticism, he got a little down on himself. Michael
I
Scott.
think, yeah, a lot of very talented people kind of, doubt themselves and
Yeah,
what they do, and but I think he's a great songwriter. I think he's an interesting guy. I honestly don't know a whole lot about him.
yeah,
Um, I learned a lot just even putting this podcast together.
yeah,
Um, the Waterboys are a band that I was paying attention to in the late '80s a little bit, especially when like Fisherman Blues came out and
yeah.
stuff like that. And I kind of got out of it. I kind of forgot about them. I have to admit,
That's what
for a lot,
happens sometimes.
yeah, for a lot of years. And then I was kind of like reintroduced to them not that long ago, and I was like, wow, here's a band that really kind of stuck the test of time. And yeah, okay, they're not that big in the States, and that's fine. I mean, I'm more of a, I mean, you know me. I like everything, and
Yeah,
I follow stuff that a lot of Americans don't even fucking know. Okay, but they really kind of stood the test of time, and Mike Scott is out there constantly, either as a solo act with the Waterboys, whatever, and really, I mean, it's interesting stuff, and I think it stands the test of time.
not bad. So man, what a show, Mike, that you put together, and you're international. You're in Ireland.
I'm in Dublin right now. Yes,
Okay, right
I'm right across the street from the Guinness factory.
not bad, man. That's pretty cool.
When I open my window, I see these guys loading the trucks. I mean, it's. I got to tell you a funny story. I want to share this with everybody. I got here about a week ago, and I was walking along the Liffey, which is the river that cuts through Dublin. I was lumped up. What else is I spent the whole day imbibing, and the I was waiting at a light. Now, one thing you got to remember when you're in Dublin is that they drive on the other side of the street, right? So you got to kind of be careful, cross at the green, not in between, and
Yeah,
look both ways because they're coming from the other way. It's not like America, right? So I'm at the light, and all of a sudden, the Guinness truck is coming down the street towards me. It's a Guinness truck, open back truck with about 50 kegs of beer in the back, and there's two drivers, right? I'm at the light and I see them, and they're gonna turn in front of me, and I get down on one knee and I genuflect. I go like this. And they see me, they're honking the horn, they start cracking up, and I'm going like, name of the Father, Son, Holy Ghost.
don't run me over. That's funny.
Yeah, I mean, it really was. I mean, Dublin is an amazing place. I've been blogging about it a little bit. I hope everybody maybe has a chance to see it, but see my blogs about it. But yeah, I mean, it's an amazing place. But the Waterboys are popular here, man. Even now, I mean, I hear them in the bars. I hear them all over the place, and they're coming around again.
Yeah, they're playing What's the Hole.
I know.
So that should be pretty cool.
Yeah.
So all right, Mike, let's end this show so you can go back to your day in Ireland. And then
Guess where
when you
I'm,
coming
guess
back?
where I'm going now? Guess where I'm going now?
Well,
I'm going to Conor McGregor's bar,
oh wow.
Black
Nice.
Forge Inn.
That food in. Man,
Yeah,
take some
I'm gonna
pictures.
have dinner over there. some assholes tried to burn it down about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, you were saying that.
Yeah,
All right, Mike. So what do we say? We don't get drunk?
we get lumped up.
See you next time.
Take care, people.